Already countdown to the Geekcast. This is Retro right here. We're back again. We got an awesome artist, a writer. Pretty much he's done everything in the comic book industry. He's working on games currently. Can't really tell what he's working on, but he's doing a little bit of everything. He's written Predator, X-Men. So currently he's writing Thundercats Apex. And that's going to give us introduction to a new character that's going to tie in Silverhawks, which we're going to get later in January. But before we get him in the room, let's give a quick shout out to our sponsor who helps us with our podcast, Dragon's Lair Alamo Ranch. Of course, without them, we wouldn't be able to talk about comics. And like I said, when you get a chance, swing by. They're good for gaming and comics. Alrighty, so now we're going to get our special guest into the room. How's it going, Mr. Ed?
Hey, it's going all right. And yourself?
Pretty good, sir. So I know a lot about you. You started in the industry. You wanted to be a comic book artist, and then you kind of ended up doing both writing and doing your own comics. And then later on down the line, you kind of didn't want to do the art anymore. You wanted just to focus on writing. And you've gotten to work with Marvel, and Image, and if you were to talk to younger self, 13-year-old who was reading Captain Canuck back in the day, and look back that you're getting to work on this IP that you grew up with, could you believe it? Or how would you?
I think that, honestly, my 13-year-old self would be super annoyed that I wasn't an artist and that I hadn't stuck with that. Because at that age, and up until, even after high school, before, when I went into fine arts, that was it. I was going to be a comic book artist. And without a lot of interest, I always had some interest in writing. I did I wrote quite a bit of sort of what we would call fan fiction now as a kid. Back then it wasn't called fan fiction. We didn't have a term for it. It was just, I'm a big horror film fan. I would write a lot of stories about Jason and Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, wow. Predator, Alien, etc. But yeah, I think my 13-year-old self was a little prick. I think he would just be annoyed that I wasn't an artist. But I think he would be pretty stoked that I ended up working for Marvel, working for DC, Image. No, 13 Image wasn't around, but for a lot of these companies and a lot of the books that I grew up reading. So nice. He also probably be pretty bummed out that my rap career never took off as well.
So as a 13-year-old artist, wanting to be artist, and who was your artist you looked up to at that time frame that inspired you to continue to or really go from?
Todd McFarlane was like a god to me. I wanted to be Todd McFarlane. And that's actually a large part of why I started writing, was because Todd McFarlane and the rest of them split off and did Image, and they were writing their own material. Where I lived at the time, I tried to find local writers. I lived in a place called Kelowna. It's in British Columbia, Canada. At the time, I think there was about 200,000 people. So it wasn't a huge place, but this is pre-internet, so there was no way for me to find writers out there. So I had encountered a couple through comic book shops and stuff, and it wasn't a good match. It was a bit of oil and water, because they were more approach artists as just the people to help them realize their dreams rather than being collaborators.
Yeah.
And that was about the same time that Todd McFarlane and them split off and did Image. And I was like, well, they're writing their own stuff. I can write my own stuff. And I originally only did it out of necessity, because I needed stuff to draw. I felt like I needed to do stories in order to sort of get discovered and get hired by Marvel or DC, whatever that was at the time. But yeah, it was Todd McFarlane, giant for me, being Canadian, he being one of the biggest sort of creators of comic books at the time, and also a Canadian. I think he lived not very, I lived in Kelowna. I know he's originally from Calgary, but I believe he lived kind of on Vancouver Island or somewhere there for a little while.
Wow.
So he was a massive influence and sort of a push for me, because I think as well, being a Canadian, there was this kind of idea that you had to be an American to make it, that maybe you had to live in New York or you had to be near the New York offices. And seeing someone doing so well, yeah, it was just a huge inspiration.
Nice. Of course, times have changed, and you've got artists from all over the world working for the industry, and with this internet that we have allows us to do so much more. As younger self me, if you would have told me, 13-year-old me, that I'll be here interviewing artists and writers like you, I would probably have been laughing. Because the same thing,
Yeah,
you know, for us, we could only get our comic book store at, you know, at that time frame in the 80s, there weren't very many. It was either at convenience stores to get comics, you know, and it wasn't as big as it is currently. But it's awesome to get to talk to people like you that, you know, give the backbone to the industry, because without the writers and the artists, we wouldn't have all these cool comics to read and kill time and take us away from the world around us. Um, and I've heard, I mean, I got to interview Drew, and he talked about when they announced they were doing Thundercats, and he talked about how he ended up like just kept sending Dynamite artwork so he can try to get the job, and then he finally got the job. And I heard, as well as you, kind of same thing. When you heard Thundercats were coming, you kind of were like asking Declan,
I,
"Hey."
I started pestering Declan right away, because I was like, look, they're doing Thundercats. They've got to do Silverhawks. When is it happening? And he was like, I don't think that, when I first poked him, when I first poked him, it was before I think Thundercats became the sales success. He just started working on it. Like, it was very early days. And there were no plans, as far as I know, to do Silverhawks. And yeah, I just kind of, every time I would talk to Declan, I'm like, so hey, like, keep me posted on what's going on, because the second, if they're doing a Silverhawks book, I want to throw my hat in the ring. I want to be like the guy to do Silverhawks. And it was interesting because Nate, who's the editor, Nate Cosby, who edits the Thundercats and Silverhawks, when he called me to offer me Thundercats Apex, I was like, oh, here it is, right? Silverhawks. And he called me, and we went over the book they want to do. And don't get me wrong, Apex is really cool. It's a really fun idea, and I'm really excited that I got to write it. And I'm very happy with how the book came out. But partway through the call, I was like, same thing. I'm like, when are you guys doing Silverhawks? And he's like, well, yeah, no plans to do Silverhawks right now. And I said, well, I think you guys should. And he called me back 2 days later and just said, did you want to write Silverhawks? I'm like, yeah, damn right, I want to write Silverhawks. And that was literally it. And so, I've been developing it and writing it since. So that was at some point during the summer. I've lost track of time.
Well, the thing is about that too. I mean, it's been, I'm pretty sure, in the works for a little bit longer. It just came out recently, but because like us, when we order our comics for the store, we're having to order, because like we get our Diamond book for this month, November, but it's for books that are coming out in January. So it's kind of
Right.
like so how can you write? So, because you're not just doing this currently, you're also doing a game as well. How
Mm-hmm.
can you determine it to like, okay, I'm doing this for right now, and then I'm going from there to this? How can you control all that? I mean, that's got to be crazy.
Yeah, I think it's just with like a lot of time, a lot of like, I've been doing it for, like professionally now. I've been writing comics for, I think, 12 years. But before that, I was self-publishing, and doing my own stuff since like the mid 90s, right? And it's just a matter of like, you just have to sit down and do it, right? When people talk about how they get writer's block, or how, the thing that I come across a lot, where people are talking about how they're sort of in the development stage, or still like, doing the world building. That's what I'm looking for. They're doing all the world building, and I see people who just get lost in doing that forever and ever, right? Like,
Wow.
it's almost like an excuse not to write. And don't get me wrong, that part is important to it, but like, it's people will get so absorbed into that and forget that it's part of the journey towards writing. But yeah, for me, I don't have a choice, right? Like, and I learned that, I think, when I had when my daughter was born, I was doing webcomic that I would update quite frequently, but I also had a full-time job, and we lived in the middle. Like we lived I had a 2-hour commute each way. So I was gone for 12 and a half hours every day. We'd come home, I'd spend time with my wife and my kid, and we'd hang out and do whatever. But if I wanted to draw my comics, I couldn't, I didn't have ample time. I didn't have all day to wait for inspiration to hit me. I had to sit down at a certain time, and back then I was writing and drawing at the same time. So I'd have to sit down with my drawing board and just get to work, and it just has to happen. And the same with writing, sometimes you do get writer's block, but I don't sit and just stare at a piece of paper. I'll just start writing garbage until it's not garbage anymore. I find just that thing of getting the momentum going, right? It's, if you want to go for a run, you sometimes just got to walk for a little bit first, right? And then build up to run. And so I have a thing where, like you said, I'm writing for video games right now, and I'm doing that full time. So that's 9 to 5. And so generally 5 o'clock comes, I close all the windows for the video game. I pull up the script, and I just get to work on the script. And I generally, with the scripts, I have a goal if I'm going to try and hit 3 or 4 pages a day, right? When I'm writing. And so as long as I can do that, then I'm cool, man. And it's a great when there's a double page splash or a splash page in there, because it's not as easy for the artist as it is for me, but when it's splash, and I can go. But yeah, I just sit down, I write my 3 or 4 pages for that day, and I just don't let myself not do it. I have to kind of hold my feet to the fire. And I'll sometimes switch back and forth. Sometimes I'll get up really early and write it, and I love when I can do that, but I'm not a morning person, so it's very difficult for me to wake up. But those days where I can wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and write for 3 hours before I hop into the video game stuff is amazing, but rare, because 6 o'clock in the morning sounds great until it's actually 6 o'clock in the morning. You got to get out of bed.
Oh, I feel you with that. I mean, I work a 9 to 5 job. I work in the medical field. So I'm working 9 to 5. I work 3 days a week at the comic book store. So as soon as I get off at 5, go there, work until 10. I love with the customers, because customers come in, they're looking for something to read, or, hey, do you have a recommendation? And for us, that's one thing I always hated about working, going to a GameStop or whatever. You have somebody working there, but they don't love their job. Right. And that's the thing about you and, Drew. You guys love this IP. So, with Thundercats, what Declan has done and Drew has done has been phenomenal. And I look forward to it like I did watching the cartoon every day when the comic drops. And that's what when this was announced, I was like a kid in the candy store, man. I was ready. I was ready to go. I was on board. And when you responded back to me, I'll be honest with you, man, I thank you a lot for taking the time to, respond back to me and come on to talk about this, because just from the covers and then some of the other news I've heard that you have talked about, you're kind of in my head, because you were yeah, you were yeah, we're gonna get these backstories on these characters and stuff, and I'm like, that's what I always wanted to know. How did, what made Quicksilver the leader, and what made Bluegrass, the man who drove the Mirage? And okay, my thing in the toy wise, the Mirage and the Thunder Tank were the biggest thing of the toys. I never got a Mirage. My thing is, and it's gonna be the dumbest question: are we gonna see the Mirage in the comic at all?
Yeah, of course the Mirage will be there. It's not going to come in for a few issues. It's the thing is, we're really taking our time, sort of building the world up, building everything up. You're not even going to see the Silverhawks as a team until the end of the 3rd issue, because we're going to take that time, sort of building and bringing the team together. So, my hope is that through just really developing these characters, that we can not only bring in the people who grew up with it, but bring in new readers, and help a whole new generation hopefully discover the Silverhawks. We are gonna there's some stuff where we're gonna do where there is hints in the cartoon that there was Silverhawks before the Silverhawks, that they're not the first sort of group of
Wow.
Silverhawks, and that's a thing we're going to be playing around with as well. That has been a lot of fun.
And that kind of got me too when you mentioned that about you know, Stargazer and talking about that. Um, yeah, we want to know. I mean, because one of the things that always, and then you may think I'm crazy, was like they really don't explain how they got picked for one. And to
Right.
me, that as a kid, of course, we don't think about that, but as later on in life, you think about it, it kind of remind you of RoboCop because you got half human, half, and it's kind of like there's so much questions that you want to ask about that. And one of the things that I did see in one of the interviews is your character was Hot Wing that you liked.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So how was
So
it doing that?
yeah, Hot Wing is just like because he came in later, but I always thought he was a cool character, and he's a little bit weird in the cartoon because he's like a Silverhawk, but wasn't kind of dead. He was just like somehow uh, had the armor. It's been a minute, so I'm trying to remember how they properly introduced him. But for us, for the way that we're doing the book, he's coming in much earlier, um, and like we're keeping a lot of the sort of the stuff with him and his magic and his ability to use magic and stuff. Um, and I don't want to spoil too much, but he comes in. Him and Bluegrass sort of come in together. They're buds
Oh wow.
before they become part of the Silverhawks. But going back to what you said, it's like this is a large part of like how each of the members become part of the Silverhawks is largely because in one way or another they've been I don't want to say like victims is not necessarily the right word, but maybe it is. Like they've kind of suffered sort of Monstars sort of wrath. They've each had their own sort of run in with Monstar or his cartel that has impacted their lives and is what has pushed them towards. So it's the cartoon is more that they are sort of like handpicked,
Yeah.
and we do kind of keep that, but they have each have their own motivations for why they want to go and take down Monstar beyond him just being a bad dude.
Gotcha. So in other words, basically each of them were affected in some form or fashion in either a
Yes.
crime or crime towards them in some way. Okay, I get you. That sounds and that's one thing I'm a big guy in crimes things, and that's kind of you kind of like the crime, and you mentioned about
Yeah, I'm a
how
crime junkie. Yep.
yeah, and that's the thing to me. Like my wife laughs at me. She's like, "How do you go to?" I'll put it on the crime shows and fall asleep listening
Right.
to them. Um, so it really makes me because it kind of Stargazer kind of reminds me of a Commissioner Gordon to a
Yeah, I
certain
can see that.
extent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I kind of want to get more into that to the them doing the criming and investigating. I would I'm all on board. When I heard you say that, I was like, "Oh man." Like right now there's another comic that's out that has that focus of like CSI kind of thing. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I can
Nice.
just read it like crazy. And then my two characters from Thundercats and here is Lionel and Bluegrass. Those are my two favorite characters. And when you mentioned, I overheard in one of the interviews that you're gonna give us more backstory in Bluegrass and stuff like that. So I was kind of like, I was a kid in heaven when I heard that. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, because he was the mechanic of the Mirage. He's the one that flew the team where they needed to get to, and it kind of was like I don't know. It's just kind of weird. That character kind of inspired me to become what I do now, which is fix equipment. Which is
Awesome.
kind of weird. Yeah. So you have been working on other stuff, not just in this. I mean, you worked on Predator as well, and
Yeah,
you created a whole new character for that world. So
I did.
you're
Yes.
literally given a playground, and you're going to be able to give us a lot more in this Silverhawks world, right?
That's the hope. That's the plan. Yeah. It's the dream that we're kind of driving towards with the book. Is to really expand it out, really like kind of keep the vibe of the original cartoon, um, but like just sort of give it that that sort of update polish that it needs without like without kind of undoing or undermining, you know, what the cartoon did, but just like building upon what they built.
Nice. Yeah, because that was one thing I did notice. A couple of Easter eggs in issue 8. I saw in that
Right.
artifact room, Mumstar's bad or his eye patch kind of was in that artifact room, and I was kind of like,
Right.
no, that can't be. And then later on, like literally almost a week later, they dropped this, and I'm like, what? I was like, I knew I thought I saw something there, but I was
Right.
like, no, this can't be. But yeah, I mean, was that something you helped do, or was that something they already had incorporated?
No, we were so I Declan and I and Nate, the three of us talked quite a bit about everything that's going on with
Yeah.
everything here. And I believe that Declan was writing issue 8 at the time that like Silverhawks was for certain thing. And so he had mentioned that he wanted um, to drop something in that room and
Wow.
to have like that little Easter egg in there. So that was largely Declan just kind of wanting to point to the book and sort of maybe try and hint at it and get some folks excited.
Nice. Well, it did. I mean, to hardcore fans, I mean, that's one thing that I've been pushing right now for some of our subscribers that, hey, if you grew up with this, issue 8 you want to pick up and there's going to be some Easter eggs in there. So kind of like give him that little hint, and then talking about Apex and promoting Apex. And so in the Apex series, that character is a character that you help create. And um that's one thing, I guess. Let me reward this. You working with the artist, you put it on paper, and it's the artist's job to create your imagine what you're writing on paper and by the details you put.
I think so. Apex was a little bit different because Apex was something that Drew and Declan they'd come up with this character.
Oh, okay.
So the full, like, they had the sort of like I don't want to say bones because they had quite a bit of like who the character was, what they were up to, and that sort of stuff. There was a couple things that I had a hand in.
Oh, nice.
And part of it was what Apex looks like under the hood.
Okay.
When you pull that back, because there were some ideas floating around, and I had this like kind of vision one night of what I thought would be really cool, and I did a really bad like Photoshop sort of render for them, and then Declan took that and he refined it, and then that's the thing that we use for Rafa. In terms of characters, and like if I'm creating a character when I'm working on a book, the thing that attracts me to comic books, the thing I love about doing comics, and the reason like I'm not out here like writing prose or anything like that, is that I like collaborating with an artist. So all my favorite things, like every relationship when you're working with an artist is a little bit different. Some they just like to get the script and then they go away and they come back and everything's done. My preference is always like when I work with artists where we're just constantly going back and forth with ideas and such.
Wow.
So when we create characters, so there's some characters coming up that are new characters, and kind of what I'll do is like just a quick synopsis. I'm like, here's what I think. This is what I think the character is. This is their vibe. This is their the backstory as I have it now, and I'll send that to the artist, and my preference is we have a bit of back and forth. They come with ideas and like, what if this instead? Like, what if this for their backstory, whatever.
Nice.
And then they start deciding, and it's just kind of like a back and forth process. Like, a lot of times with a lot of artists I work with, we'll have like Messenger open or like some sort of chat program open. And just when we're around, one of us will pop something in there back and forth. And so it feels like a much more organic. And then it feels like when those characters are sort of born, when they're out there, that it's a creation of two minds. It's not just like
I know what you're talking
one
about.
of us sort of forcing our will on the other person. And hopefully then it feels like, with Rafa and I on Apex or George and I on Silverhawks, those two books are going to feel a little bit different because there's different ingredients in the mix, right? There's two different people.
So yeah, because that's one thing that Drew had mentioned when I interviewed him is that him and Declan would go back and forth with each other, like, "Hey, what about this?" Or "Can I put this in
Mhm.
there?" And that was the fun part because this is okay. These as a comic book geek, these are the little things that make fans happy. So he mentioned, "Hey, can I put this in there?" He's like, "Okay, well, maybe an issue too." And the little things really make, especially true geeks. Um, Now, one of the questions I want to ask about that, because I don't know if you remember, and it's gonna be the corniest thing ever. Do you remember the taxi driver? The little goofy taxi driver from
Uh,
Silverhawks?
I'm blanking on his name, but yes,
Yeah,
he's
me
like
too.
the
I can't
comic
remember his
relief
name.
dude.
Yes.
He's always complaining about being out. Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So is there I know I mean he's dumb. It's a dumb character. But is there a chance we're gonna see his taxi cab somewhere in the background or it's just little Easter eggs? Those little things make the comic way better for kids. I mean,
So
not just kids.
he's not. We're not going to do like the same comic relief stuff there, but at some point you're going to see him. At some point he'll be around. So
Oh wow, that is you see, that's why people like you who love this IP, I think if we got that more, I think we would get better comics and movies because they get all these actors and I mean not actors, but the directors. They're directors of great movies, but depending what they're directing, it's not the same thing. You're asking someone to come in and you're asking um a guy who cooks steak to come and make Mexican food, and all he does
right,
is he's just good at steak. But you know what I mean? And it's kind of like you want someone who's universal and thinks just like the fans, and I feel that's what you and Declan are doing because Declan right now is doing Terminator as well. I read that one.
yeah,
Oh man, I'm a big Terminator fan too because I'm an old school person, and that's the same thing with you mentioned that Predator's your kind of thing as well. All the old school movies that take it is what you're into, right?
yeah. I grew up like a giant Predator fan. I saw it at the drive-in for the first time. Like that's where I saw it for the first time as a kid. We still had a drive-in. But yeah, no, I'm a giant Predator fan, and the some of the stuff that I put in the original, 6-issue thing was some of that stuff was like things I came up with when I was much younger.
Wow.
Obviously, like through the filter of an old, a more mature filter, and like, a more refined filter, hopefully. But some of those are just like it was me just like kind of fulfilling this lifelong dream because like a huge Predator fan.
Wow. That is so awesome. Well, we're going on 30 minutes, and I don't want to take any more of your time because I know you're a busy man. I really
Thanks.
want to thank you for
Yeah.
taking the time to come on and
No.
talk Thundercats and geek out. Uh, but hey, Countdown City Geekcast, go pre-order the book. Silverhawks drops in January. You're going to want to get this um, and pick up Apex because you're going to want to read that before
Yeah.
Silverhawks.
And that FOC, I think, for Apex is on the 11th. I don't know when this is airing, but November 11th. Get it in.
Yes, definitely. Get your pre-orders in, mark it out. And again, guys, this is Retro Ray getting to talk to awesome artists and writers. We'll catch you next time.